Thank you for tuning in and welcome back, team. In today's real estate advice episode, you'll learn about leasehold versus fee simple. What's the difference? Some pros and cons you need to know, and some helpful terms about leasehold estates that'll help you along the way. So the reason I'm making this video today is one of our teammates, Brian Smith out of Hawaii, had contacted me a few months ago to help him find a top agent in Hawaii to help him buy his first home. In a recent conversation with Brian, he was saying it'd be great if I had a video out about the differences between leasehold versus fee simple to help people out. It is important to note that there's going to be three main states that this applies to. It's Hawaii, New York, and Florida. By the way, my name is Andrew Finney, your real estate geek. If you need help finding a top agent where you live, or if you simply want to drop me a line to say hello, my contact info is below. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel now and like this video. Okay, team, so to Brian's point, let's go ahead and answer the question, what is a fee simple property? A fee simple is the most recognizable and complete form of ownership to a buyer of residential property. That's number one. So when someone buys a fee simple property, they're actually purchasing the entire property, meaning that the buyer would own the land and all the improvements on the land. So it might be important to understand what improvements are. An improvement in the case of the way that it's defined is actually the home or the structures existing upon the land. So if you look out in your community right now, or if you own a home right now and you're looking out there and you look at your property or you look at someone else's property and you see the land, you see the trees, you see the fences, you see the actual house on top of that land, that means that in a fee simple situation, you own all of that. Okay, so the only thing that a buyer has to realize with the fee simple is that you're entitled to the full enjoyment of the property, and it's only limited by any kind of zoning laws, deed restrictions, or subdivision restrictions or covenants, kind of like an HOA with the codes, covenants, and restrictions there. So there is no time limit on the duration of ownership, and the property may also be passed along to your heirs or somebody that you leave it to in your will. The majority of properties sold in mainland United States, right here in the United States, is actually fee simple. So Hawaii has both options, Florida has both options, New York has both options. So it's important now to understand what is a leasehold. So the remainder of this video, we're really going to start going into what is a leasehold, pros and cons of a leasehold, and some considerations that you should know, okay? So a leasehold is an estate or an interest in a real property held in a lease agreement with a fee simple landowner. So somebody actually has a fee simple and they're now have it as a leasehold and leasing it out. So the purchaser is actually purchasing the improvements of or structures like the house or apartment, but not the land. So the buyer is actually leasing the land beneath the improvements. The owner gives another right to occupancy or use of the land for a given length of time. So while the bundle of rights the lease agreement provides for you is very similar to like a fee simple bundle of rights, there are several important differences that you should be aware of moving forward with a leasehold property. A buyer of a leasehold property does not own the actual land. So when we were talking about fee simple, they own the land and the structure. In a leasehold situation, the leaseholdee does not own any of the land that the improvement is actually on. So whenever you purchase through a leasehold, you actually are buying the right, so to speak, to occupy the structure that exists atop of that land. And you're kind of like paying rent, and really was what it comes down to. So the use of the property is limited by the remaining years indicated on the lease and the period of time that will be stated in the lease. In a lot of cases, leaseholds might be originally for like 55 years. So then you'd be buying it out for the term of the lease or a certain amount of time in that lease. So when the lease term expires, the land returns to the owner, the one that has the fee simple ownership of the property. And most leases normally begin as like a long-term lease, but if the owner of the lease decides to sell the interest, then the term does not roll back, it counts down. So here's another example going back to like a leasehold property that has 55 years on the lease. Let's say that you had you're the buyer, and let's just go with like Bobby the buyer, right? So Bobby the buyer decided to sell his interest and 12 years later to buyer. They lived there for 12 years and they decided to sell it to, let's say, let's come up with another name, Betty Buyer, right? And then Betty Buyer went ahead and lived on it for 43 years. And now Bobby and Betty actually get married. The term is still 43 years as opposed to 12. So the term years remaining on the lease can actually have a direct impact on obtaining financing. And it's important to know that. And if you're looking at like leasehold properties, you want to discuss that with a local loan officer and ask them about the differences in between the fee simple and the leasehold and how that impacts your financing options. Most lease rents will then be adjusted periodically, right? So commonly every 10 to 15 years, you're going to get an adjustment on the actual lease rent. Those adjustments are based upon a formulation taking into account the current market value of land. So if the market value of the land actually goes up, then your lease rent will as well. So why is this important to you, and why is it some of the pros of a leasehold? Well, one of the first reasons that you might consider purchasing a leasehold property is that customer is far less expensive to purchase than a fee simple property, making it like an initial investment lower and more affordable. So if you have like a tight housing budget, and let's say that a fee simple in Hawaii, and you were on one of the outward sides or leeward sides of Hawaii, and let's say the property was $400,000 as fee simple, it might only be $150,000 or $180,000 as a leasehold. So it makes it much more affordable for somebody that get into home ownership through a leasehold estate. So the possibility that the lease may be extended or renewed is also helpful. The possibility that the owner will offer or make the fee available for purchase. So you might say, okay, what's a translation there, right? So that's like the owner offering to sell their remaining interest in the land to you, the leaseholder. So in that case, then the person that would be selling it to you now, if you were a leaseholdee or a leaseholder, then what's going to happen is they can actually sell you the fee simple rights to that property. So then you own everything, the land and the structure upon it. So it's important to know that. So once purchased, the leasehold property converts to a fee simple, and it's all yours just like a traditional purchase here on the mainland. So if you're purchasing a leasehold condo with the fee available, many lenders will roll that into the loan. So it's actually very helpful. But go ahead and talk to a local loan officer, especially if you're looking at this option in Hawaii, New York, and Florida, so that you can go ahead and understand how that works and how it's going to impact you and your monthly mortgage amount. The cost of a leasehold mortgage payment is oftentimes less than the rent on a comparable unit, so that's another advantage to it. And you might possibly get some tax credits. It's important that you might possibly get some tax credits if it's like a depreciation, so the market value of the land goes down. So it's important to know those different things. Those are some of the pros that you could probably enjoy with the leasehold property. So what's the bad news? And there are some disadvantages, most definitely, to leasehold ownership. So here we go. Let's take a look at 6 of them. One of the disadvantages is that at the end of the lease, you have to give back the land unless you are offered the fee or you negotiate an extension of the lease. If there's a surrender clause in the lease, the buildings or other improvements may revert back to the owner, the one that has the fee simple ownership. Each year, as the lease term ticks down, the property becomes less valuable and thus harder to sell or obtain financing on because there's less years in the term of the lease. If there is less than 10 years left on the lease, financing will not be available and you will have to seek out only cash buyers. So obviously, if you're the one that owns it as a fee simple and you're looking to sell your lease, if you have less than 10 years left on that leasehold, then you're going to have to be looking for cash buyers. So in order to qualify for a leasehold property, let's say through a 1031 exchange, there must be a minimum of 30 years left on the lease. In most cases, the homeowners association fees are not rolled into the lease rent. They are 2 separate payments, and that's also true of any kind of traditional properties here in the mainland. Whenever you think of your monthly mortgage amount and you're coming up with like your monthly budget for your household, you have to keep in mind that an HOA is above and beyond your monthly mortgage. It doesn't all get rolled in. It's 2 separate and distinct payments. So how do you choose between like a leasehold or fee simple? And it's really going to boil down to your personal choice and comfort level and how much time you plan on living in the home. How many years are left on the lease may affect the sellability and not to mention your livability, right? It's all about your choices and it's all about understanding what's going on. And as promised, I shared with you that I would give you some helpful terms whenever you're talking about leasehold. So I'm going to take a look over to my left right now with some of the notes that I made with some terms that were really important and kind of just popped out at me to share with you. So one of them is actually lease term. And the way that you define lease term is the length of the lease period, and usually 55 years or more. The next one is lease rent, the amount of rent paid to the lessor or for the use of the land, in this case, the one that holds the fee simple ownership. The next is a fixed period, the period in which the lease rent amount is fixed. And going back to what we discussed earlier in this video, it normally goes up like every 10 to 15 years based upon a formula that if the land value goes up, then so will the lease rent, okay? The renegotiation date is also important for you to note. So the day after the fixed term of the lease rent is renegotiated. So it's important to know what your renegotiation date is in a contract. The expiration date, the date that the lease ends, is obviously very important. Again, if it's under 10 years, you may have a difficult time financing it. And if you actually own a property and you're using it or you're trying to sell it with a leasehold, then you got to keep that in mind that if you're 10 years or less on your total lease, then you're going to be looking for a cash buyer. So a reversion. The reversion is the act of giving back the property to the lessor, okay? Surrender is the terms of the reversion. And the lease fee interest is the amount a lessor will accept to convey fee simple ownership. So those terms are very important to note in those contracts. If you're in Hawaii, Florida, or New York looking at a leasehold versus fee simple situation. Now, as a trusted real estate advisor, I will highly encourage you and strongly suggest that you reach out to a real estate attorney familiar with leasehold and fee simple properties to better understand the process and the implications that this has on you. Now, obviously, if you're working with a top agent in one of those three areas, then they should be able to better explain this to you and give you some different options that you might want to consider when it pertains to leasehold versus fee simple properties. If you need help finding a top agent in your area, I'll put my contact information up in a moment. It's always in the show more description below, so if you want to hit me up, please go ahead and tell me what you're thinking. So that's been today's video. Thank you again, Brian Smith from Hawaii, letting us know that this would be a good video to make for our community to help us continue to learn and grow and empowering our teammates. Thanks, Brian. Really appreciate you. So if you have any questions about this video, then go ahead and tell me what you're thinking about it in the comment sections below. What was the biggest thing you took from this video? That's really what I want to know, is what's the biggest and most important thing that you took from either the fee simple or the leasehold? I mean, was it the reality that with a fee simple that you actually own the land and the improvements upon it, and that you still have some, even though you have full enjoyment of the property, you have a right to it, it could be limited by zoning, deed, subdivision restrictions, or covenants? Or was it in the leasehold category where it's like, okay, wow, you're kind of like renting the property and it's a form of home ownership? Maybe you would have some questions about that, or maybe that was something that really stuck out to you, or the fact that you can renegotiate these things, or even the person that holds the leaseholder, if they have the fee simple, can actually offer it to you for sale and it can be financed. Now, again, you want to talk to a top local loan officer in your area to better understand your options there. So tell me what you're thinking about in the comment section below. As promised, if you want to reach out to me, you need help finding a top agent where you live, simply drop me a line to say hello. My contact information's up. Please feel free to do so. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and do three things. Number one, please subscribe to this channel. Number two, please like this video. Number three, please share this video around with someone you know is going to be able to help. Thank you so much for joining in today, team. I'm looking forward to coming back to you again real soon. In between now and next time, and I'm wishing you and yours a lifetime full of love, wealth, abundance, and happiness. Thank you.